When I first moved into Ridgewood Estates, I expected the usual bumps that come with settling into a new place, figuring out when garbage day was, introducing myself to the neighbors, and picking up on the silent codes that every neighborhood seems to follow. What I didn't expect was to encounter a self-anointed overlord named Karen Blake, who genuinely seemed to think she ruled the entire community. From day one, Karen had it out for me. I had no clue what I'd done. Maybe she resented people who didn't immediately bend to her will. Maybe she had way too much time on her hands. Or maybe she'd just been waiting for someone to challenge her for years, and I happened to be the unlucky soul who finally did. It started with petty annoyances. Notes taped to my door complaining that my grass wasn't manicured enough. Gripes about how my trash cans were placed a few centimeters too far from the curb. Even a warning about my porch light supposedly being too bright. Every week brought a new grievance, some imaginary violation of the almighty HOA codebook. I tried to be civil at first. I cut the lawn. I repositioned the bins. I swapped out the light bulb. But nothing I did made a difference. Karen had already made up her mind. I didn't belong in her neighborhood. Then things escalated. One random Tuesday, I checked my mailbox and found an envelope bearing the official HOA logo. I rolled my eyes, expecting another laughable fine. But when I opened it, my eyebrows shot up. It was an eviction notice. I stared at it, confused. Then I blinked again. I own my house. The HOA had no legal authority to remove me. And yet, right there, in Karen's ever-patronizing tone, was a formal letter. Dear homeowner, following thorough evaluation, the Ridgewood Estates HOA has concluded that your residence no longer aligns with our community's standards and visual expectations. Due to repeated violations and unresolved issues, we are initiating your removal from the premises. You are required to vacate the property within 30 days or face further legal action. I actually laughed, loudly. Legal action? From the HOA? Against someone who owned their home? But then I caught the last sentence. Failure to comply may result in foreclosure proceedings. That made me pause. As absurd as it sounded, I knew some HOAs in the past had used dirty tactics, burying residents in fines, exploiting obscure rules, and forcing people out. It had happened before, but this time, it wasn't going to fly. Karen had no idea that the neighbor she had been tormenting, was actually her landlord. Yes, the plot twist? Karen wasn't just the overbearing president of the HOA. She was my tenant. Years earlier, I had bought several rental properties in the area. One of them turned out to be the house she lived in. I chuckled at the irony. She had just attempted to evict the one person who could legally evict her. I pulled up my records just to confirm, and sure enough, there it was, a fully signed and valid lease agreement with my name, Michael Carter, listed clearly as the property owner. I skimmed through the terms, looking for any possible flaw, but it was rock solid. And even better, Karen had broken several terms of her lease. Harassment of other tenants? Check. Unauthorized modifications to the property? Check. Posting HOA signage without approval? Yep. Undermining the legal rights of the owner? Big check. I started writing an official reply to her nonsense letter, but halfway through, I stopped. This wasn't the kind of thing you handled with an email. This needed to be done in person. If Karen was spoiling for a fight, then I'd bring the war straight to her doorstep. That afternoon, I strolled slowly toward Karen's house. My house, though she didn't know it yet. She was outside, of course, nitpicking some poor neighbor about their garden fence being just slightly too tall. The moment she saw me, her expression shifted into her trademark smug grin, the kind of practiced look someone wears when they think they've already won. I assume you received the notice, she said, folding her arms like a judge passing sentence. Nothing personal, but the HOA has made its decision. You don't fit the neighborhood standards, and that's not something we can ignore. I took a deep breath, letting the silence stretch for a moment before responding. Oh, I got your notice, I said smoothly, pulling a document from my folder. And here's mine. Her confident smirk wavered as she snatched the paper from my hand. I watched her eyes scan the words, and it didn't take long before the color drained from her face. This has to be some kind of joke, she stammered. No joke, I said, letting a grin tug at the corners of my mouth. See, Karen, the house you've been renting? I own it. You tried to evict me from Ridgewood without realizing you've been living under my roof this whole time. Kind of ironic, isn't it? Her hands trembled as she clutched the termination letter, her mouth opening and closing like she was gasping for air. There was no argument, no clever comeback, just disbelief. You wouldn't dare, she whispered. I tilted my head, pretending to consider it. Maybe I would. Maybe I wouldn't. That depends on how you want to handle this going forward. But just so we're clear, I'm done playing along. You're either stepping down from your little HOA throne or you're packing your things. Either way, your rule ends today. Her jaw clenched so tight, I thought she might snap a molar. But I didn't stick around for the explosion. I turned and walked away, leaving her frozen in place, shaking, clutching her own eviction notice. And this was just the start. Homeowners associations have a reputation for throwing their weight around, digging into obscure rules and nickel-and-diming residents until they're drowning in fees. It's a strategy that's actually pushed some folks into foreclosure. But that wasn't going to happen to me. Karen, in all her inflated sense of power, had no clue that the house she was living in belonged to me. She wasn't just the annoying HOA president who made everyone's life miserable. She was my tenant. And now, she made the worst mistake she could have. I sat at my desk later that evening, shaking my head with amusement, flipping through her paperwork. There it was, her lease, signed and dated. My name, right there, printed at the top as the legal property owner. I scanned the document again, looking for anything she might twist into a loophole. But no, everything was solid. And she had broken more than a few terms. Harassing other residents? Check. Making unauthorized changes to the property? Check. Trying to interfere with ownership rights? Massive check. At first, I planned to reply to her ridiculous eviction letter via email. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This was too satisfying to waste on a screen. It needed to be face-to-face. So I went back to her house that same afternoon. She was, unsurprisingly, lecturing another neighbor, this time about flowers extending past the edge of a walkway. When she spotted me approaching, she immediately switched back into her queen of the block persona. I assume you received the notice, she repeated, folding her arms again. It's nothing personal. The HOA just doesn't believe you're fit here. I took my time, breathing in the moment. Oh, I got the notice, I said evenly. And here's my reply. I handed her the lease termination notice. Her smirk crumbled. What is this? She asked, snatching the paper from my hands. I stood silently, arms crossed, as she read the document. The color drained from her face again. This can't be real, she muttered. You can't do this. Oh, but I can, I replied, because I own the house you live in. You tried to evict me while staying on my property. How's that for poetic justice? She stood there frozen, hands gripping the paper like a lifeline, mouth moving but no words coming out. You wouldn't dare, she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. I tilted my head. Maybe, maybe not. It depends on whether you plan to continue playing dictator or pack your things and go. Her face flushed with rage, and her jaw looked like it might shatter from how tightly it was clenched. But I didn't give her the chance to respond. I turned around and walked off, leaving her there with her hands shaking and her illusion of control shattered. And believe me, this was just the first move. By the next day, Karen was deep in denial. Even with a legally binding lease termination in hand, she couldn't wrap her head around the fact that I had the power to remove her. I saw it in her eyes. She was searching for a loophole, trying to figure out some rule or clause that could save her. But there was nothing. Still, as expected, the HOA made its move. I received an email the following morning. I didn't even have to open it to know it came straight from Karen's desk. The subject line? Illegal eviction notice. Violation of HOA bylaws. I sighed. Of course. When I opened it, I nearly laughed. Dear homeowner, it has come to our attention that you have initiated unauthorized eviction proceedings against a resident of this community. The HOA maintains strict policies against retaliatory behavior and unlawful removals. Any continued attempts to displace a resident without proper process will result in fines and legal action. Please consider this your formal warning. Ridgewood HOA Compliance Team. Fines? Legal action? I almost had to admire the nerve. Karen was clearly trying to wield HOA authority as a shield. But what she failed to understand, what she refused to acknowledge, was that HOA bylaws don't override state property laws. Not even close. Karen could appeal to the HOA all she wanted. It didn't change the reality. She was out of options, and I was about to make that crystal clear. HOA bylaws don't override landlord-tenant law. I wasn't evicting Karen Whitman because of some personal grudge, nor was I violating any community rules. I was removing a tenant who had breached her lease. Plain and simple. Still, I wasn't going to let her threats go unanswered. If Karen wanted to play legal games, I was more than happy to meet her on the board. I composed a formal response to the HOA's so-called warning. It was professional, but I made it very clear that I wasn't backing down. 2. Ridgewood HOA Compliance Team. Subject: response to alleged lease violation / unlawful eviction. Dear Compliance Team, thank you for your message. I understand your concern regarding tenant removals. However, Karen Whitman is not simply a resident of the community. She is my tenant. As the legal property owner, I have exercised my right to terminate her lease due to multiple documented violations. This decision is fully compliant with both state and federal housing regulations. Please be advised, this matter falls strictly within the scope of landlord-tenant law and is not subject to HOA authority. Any further interference in this legal process may be considered harassment, and I am prepared to pursue legal recourse if necessary. Best regards, your favorite landlord. I hit send and leaned back in my chair, satisfied. Karen could try to spin her story however she liked, but the facts were on my side. Or so I thought. Later that afternoon, a knock echoed from my front door. I opened it to find 2 uniformed police officers waiting on my porch. I didn't need to ask why they were there. Sir, one of them said, we need to ask you a few questions. A complaint's been filed. I sighed, already feeling the weight of the pettiness. Let me guess. Karen Whitman. The officers exchanged a quick look. She did, one admitted. She's alleging that you're carrying out an illegal eviction and using intimidation tactics. I stepped aside and waved them in. Come on in, officers. I've got the full story ready. I showed them everything, the signed lease, the violation records, the termination notice, and even the email exchange with the HOA. They reviewed it all, flipping through pages and cross-checking the documents. Eventually, one of the officers looked up and said to his partner, this all checks out. It's legal. She's not being evicted improperly, the other added, turning to me. Sorry to bother you, sir. You'd be surprised how often people confuse HOA authority with actual property law. I let out a dry chuckle. I'm definitely seeing that firsthand. They left shortly after, but before they stepped off my porch, I saw them head across the street, right to Karen's door. I couldn't hear the full exchange, but I caught the final bit. One officer, clearly exasperated, told her, Ma'am, this is a civil matter, not a criminal one. Don't call us again unless it's a real emergency. And just like that, her armor cracked. But this was far from over. Next, I filed the formal eviction notice with the court. Once that process was underway, it was only a matter of time. She had 30 days to vacate. But I already knew she wouldn't go quietly, and I was prepared for whatever dramatic last stand she had planned. The deadline came and went. Not a single box was packed. Karen had spent the past month launching every desperate ploy she could think of, none of which worked. She filed a bogus harassment claim, which was promptly dismissed once I submitted my documentation. She tried to drag the HOA back into it, but they had finally accepted they had no jurisdiction. She even combed through her lease looking for a loophole. But the contract was ironclad. Now, she stood on the porch of my house, filled with nothing but seething rage and denial. The sheriff's department arrived right on time. 2 deputies stepped out, clipboard in hand, and made their way to her door. I stood across the street, arms folded, watching. She opened the door and tried to keep her cool, but I could see the twitch in her expression the moment she realized what this really was. There was no delay, no workaround. This was it. One officer cleared his throat and said firmly, Ma'am, we're here to carry out a court-ordered eviction. You have 15 minutes to vacate the premises. Anything left behind will be collected by a locksmith and cleaning crew. Karen's face twisted with outrage. This is my home. You can't just. The officer didn't even flinch. No, ma'am. This is his home, he said, turning and pointing directly at me. You were given 30 days' notice and multiple legal warnings. You're now trespassing. If you refuse to leave, we will have to place you under arrest. And just like that, the enforcer of HOA rules was now the one breaking the law. She turned toward me, panic flooding her eyes. Her voice dropped to a hiss. You don't have to do this, she pleaded. We can work something out. Her hands shook as she clutched the eviction notice, her face cycling through fury, disbelief, and desperation. She looked like she was grasping at words that wouldn't come. I can drop the complaints. We can. I raised an eyebrow, folding my arms. Now you want to talk? My tone was calm, but laced with sarcasm. After trying to throw me out of my own home, after fake fines, police calls, and all your HOA nonsense. She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off. No, Karen, I said sharply. You made this mess. Now you get to clean it up. Her expression shattered. For the first time, I saw it, realization, hitting her like a train. All the manipulation, the power plays, the threats, none of it mattered now. She had lost. Her shoulders stiffened, and she stormed back into the house. Her fists were clenched, rage simmering beneath the surface. I figured, foolishly, that she'd at least go out with some shred of dignity. I should have known better. Suddenly, I heard a sharp crash from inside the house. One of the deputies snapped to attention. Ma'am, step away from the property, he shouted, already rushing through the doorway. But Karen had snapped. Another loud bang echoed from within, followed by the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. I stepped closer, peering in through the open door just in time to see the chaos unfold. She was tearing the place apart. Picture frames were being hurled to the floor, sending shards of glass across the hardwood. A chair flew across the room as she kicked it, and she yanked drawers open with the frenzy of a wild animal, tossing their contents in every direction. All the while, she screamed, her voice raw, laced with rage, shrieking obscenities at no one in particular. The deputies were inside in moments. One of them raised his hands and stepped toward her calmly. Ma'am, I need you to stop, right now. She spun around, eyes wide, chest heaving. This is my home, she screeched. You have no right. I sighed and rubbed a hand down my face. She's really going out like this, huh? I muttered. One officer turned to me. Would you like to press charges for the damage? Oh, it was tempting, but I'd already won. I didn't need to prolong it. Not unless she destroys something major, I replied. I just want her gone. He gave a brief nod and turned back toward Karen. You have 5 minutes to gather your personal belongings, he told her firmly. After that, we will remove you ourselves. 15 minutes later, Karen emerged from the house, dragging a scuffed-up suitcase down the steps. Her face was flushed, whether from fury, shame, or both, I couldn't say. She shot me a venomous glare, and for a split second, I saw it, the last flicker of defiance in her eyes. She opened her mouth, clearly searching for one final jab, one last bitter comment to claw back a shred of dignity. But no words came, because there was nothing left to say. With a hard breath, she turned away, climbed into her car, and peeled off down the street. And just like that, it was over. The deputy beside me changed the locks while I signed the final paperwork. Ridgewood Estates' self-proclaimed queen, Karen Whitman, the tyrant of the HOA, the architect of countless headaches, was finally gone. I stood on my porch, breathing deeply for the first time since I moved in. No more bogus violations. No more threats. No more battles over phantom standards. For the first time, it was quiet. The next morning, as I sat outside sipping my coffee, my phone buzzed with a new email. I tapped the screen and raised an eyebrow at the subject line. HOA board vacancy. Invitation to apply. I opened it, already grinning. Dear homeowner, due to recent vacancies, a position on the Ridgewood Estates HOA board is now open. As a valued member of the community, we would like to invite you to apply. Sincerely, Ridgewood HOA board. I laughed, loud and genuine. Karen's house stood empty. The neighborhood was calm. And now they wanted me to take her place? I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I closed the email and went on with my day, smiling at the thought that wherever Karen ended up, she was probably still seething over what she'd lost. And that was enough for me. The story of Karen Whitman isn't just a satisfying tale of poetic justice. It's a reminder, a warning, even about the abuse of authority, the need for accountability, and the consequences that come when power is used for personal gain. At its core, this story highlights three important truths. Karen used her position within the HOA like a weapon, wielding it to enforce arbitrary rules and bully her neighbors. She believed that holding a title gave her the right to do as she pleased. No questions asked. This isn't a rare pattern. Throughout history, those who abuse their authority, whether in small towns, corporate offices, or political systems, often fall into the same trap. They confuse position with immunity. But true leadership is about fairness, not control. And the moment her power was challenged with legitimate legal action, her entire house of cards collapsed. Her mistake? She believed she was untouchable. But no power is permanent unless it's rooted in law, ethics, and mutual respect. Michael didn't win because he was loud. He didn't win because he had friends in high places. He won because he understood the law, and more importantly, he knew where his rights began and where Karen's authority ended. Many homeowners fall prey to manipulative HOAs because they don't realize how little actual power these associations have in certain matters. Karen counted on ignorance and fear to maintain control. But Michael wasn't afraid. He was informed. That shifted the entire dynamic. His preparation, his paperwork, and his calm confidence rendered her bluster useless. He flipped the script simply by knowing the system better than she did. Karen's fatal flaw wasn't just her aggression. It was her pride. She had spent so long dictating the rules and steamrolling anyone who got in her way that she forgot one crucial truth. No one is above the law. Her inflated sense of superiority blinded her to the real power in the situation. She thought the HOA was the ultimate authority, that as long as she was president, no one could challenge her. But she was wrong. Her arrogance made her sloppy. She overlooked critical details. She underestimated her opponent. And in the end, she lost everything because she believed she never could. Karen's little empire finally collapsed. She had spent so long playing queen of the neighborhood that she never stopped to think what might happen if someone pushed back. All her posturing, all the threats, the fines, the rules, it had all been a house of cards. And now, it had blown away in the wind. She thought she was untouchable. She wasn't. The law caught up with her, and she lost. She spent years making life miserable for everyone around her, finding people for leaving bins out too long, for daring to have the wrong shade of mulch, for planting flowers an inch past the border. She'd bullied, manipulated, and power-tripped her way through Ridgewood estates, convinced her title made her invincible. And yet, it was her own arrogance that brought her down. She crossed the wrong person, underestimated the law, and when the system she thought she controlled turned against her, all she had left was anger and destruction. But tantrums don't change reality. She was still evicted, still humiliated, still stripped of everything she had built her identity on. She did it to herself. I never had to raise my voice. I never had to stoop to her level. I didn't lie or twist the rules. I just followed them, carefully, quietly, legally. And when everything finally played out, her fall was swift, brutal, and entirely self-inflicted. Even at the end, as the deputies walked her out, she never once accepted responsibility. She raged, begged, made a scene. But she never apologized. She never admitted she was wrong. And honestly, that was fine with me. Some people never change. They don't reflect. They don't learn. They don't grow. You can't force them to see what they refuse to acknowledge. You just get out of their way and let gravity do the work. After she left, the neighborhood felt lighter, quiet, clean. I stood on my porch and breathed in the silence like it was fresh air. The next morning, as I sipped my coffee, an email came through. Subject: Ridgewood HOA board vacancy. Invitation to apply. I opened it out of curiosity, and when I saw the message, I laughed. After everything, after the fines, the fights, the threats, now, they wanted me on the board? Not a chance. I closed the email, still grinning, and got on with my day. Karen's house stood empty. Her voice gone. Her rules gone. And Ridgewood Estates had finally returned to something that felt like peace. She thought she had all the power. But in the end, it wasn't me who destroyed her. It was the truth. And that was enough. Thank you for watching this story until the end. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share, and subscribe for more HOA Untold Realities.